Hi, my name is Lee Sky, and today I'm going to demonstrate making a Peppermil with the regular mechanism with the knob on the top. This is a kind of a traditional design. You unscrew the knob to take the lid off. To fill it, we need to drill holes to accommodate the mechanism in the bottom and fit the tenon on here so we have a nice smooth turning radius inside. I buy my mechanisms from a company called Chef Specialties. Craft Supply sells them, Packard Woodworks, Woodcraft, there's a lot of them out there. Rockler, I believe, does too. And the rods come in several different sizes. This is a 14-inch rod. This is a 10-inch rod. That's a 3.5-inch rod if you're going to make like a 4-inch tall Peppermil. This is actually the mechanism with all the parts, except for the little cross member. This is a salt mechanism. It has a ceramic grinding mechanism. The aluminum and stainless steel parts, the aluminum is anodized, that way the salt won't affect it. The metal mechanism you cannot use salt on, or it will destroy it in just a short period of time. So some things we'll need: I'll be using a spindle roughing gouge, a bowl gouge, spindle gouge, and a parting tool. You may also need a round scraper depending on the shape you're doing. We'll need a Jacob's chuck to hold drill bits to bore our holes. And there are 3 different size drill bits you need. You need a 1 5/8, need a 1 16. Those fit the mechanism. And then you need a 7/8 drill bit to fit the little nickel-sized plate which goes on the underside of the lid. Okay, I'm going to start off with my square blank. Make a tenon on one end because we need to hold the wood on the one end to bore the holes in it. First we bore the 1 5/8 and then we bore the 1 16 most of the way through the bottom of our blank, and then we'll cut a tenon on this end. But when we part it off, we turn this piece around, put it in the chuck, and bore the hole through this side. And our top, we'll need a 5/16 drill bit and the 7/8 for in here where the little nickel-sized plate goes in. There's a lot of different shapes you can do. You can do it just a simple curve. If you have a very highly figured piece of wood, stick to the simpler shapes. If it's a plainer piece of wood, you can do a little more detail, and it makes the piece a lot better. This is a different style of mechanism. This is called a crush grind. There's no knob on the top. You pull the lid off to fill it, and you need another special tool to cut a groove up inside that these pieces snap in place, and you also need to glue them in. Okay, let me get my dust mask on because wood dust can be harmful to your lungs, so you should always wear a dust mask. Okay, first I want to use the spindle roughing gouge to round out my blank. And let's go back a little. I'm going to be using the 10-inch mechanism. So my bore hole, is there a pencil here? The hole I drill in the bottom will be about the depth of the head of the Forstner bed. So that's about 3/4 inch. I'll be drilling that deep. That's where the mechanism fits. So the bottom of my shaft here will be about right there. And I have about 3/8 of the thread on the top sticking out the top. We're going to lose a little bit of space in between when we part it off and make a tenon to fit into the base. So this should be about just right size. And if you measure your shaft to your blank, you can do it without having to cut the shaft and shorten it. I'm just going back and forth, rounding the blank up. With the spindle roughing gouge, I'm writing the bevel. That's the grind for sharpening. And if you notice, I'm turning the groove in it the direction I'm cutting. If I'm cutting to the right, I go to the right. I turn it to the left, I go to the left. That gives the edge a better angle to cut, and it shoots the chips over to one side instead of straight up on me. Speed it up a little. Now the blank of wood you need to start with should be at least 2.5 inches square, because your end product will be anywhere from 2 1/4 to 2 3/4 in diameter. So you don't need a 3-inch blank like everybody says, because it'll be considerably smaller. This is probably just under 2.5 inches right here at the fattest part. I'm going to make a tenon on this end because I determined this side's going to be the top of my mill. It can be either side. You need to look at your wood blank and decide if there's some interesting features such as spalting or knots or burl patch or high figure that you want up near the top of your mill. That should be the top where you do your tenon the first. Now that little cut I just did like that, these edges get very sharp. And if you just take the top edge of your parting tool and hit it like that, there's no chance of it cutting you. Alright, I want to put this in the chuck. I have my tenon cut. And your tenon must match the jaws on the chuck. I'll be using this apprentice chuck from Craft Supply. The tenon will go in like that, and the ridge here fits on top of the jaw, and the tenon fits inside the jaw. So we loosen it. Now I want to put the tailstock right back in the original hole, snug it up slightly. I don't want to push it real tight until I get the chuck tightened. Okay, now we're secured in the chuck. I'm going to round it off a little more. Now at this point, I don't want to go into my shape too much. I want to drill my holes from both ends, get the holes done, and then recenter my blank on the holes that I drill. If you make this too small, when you're drilling your holes, the drill bit is probably going to wander and go off at an angle. So up on this end, it'll be off. And when you go to recut it, your blank, your finished product will be considerably smaller. So I need to true up this end if it's not very true for drilling. And again, that's all it takes to round over that edge so you don't get cut. I'll put my Jacob's chuck in the tailstock. Now if you have a drill press, you can drill your holes on the drill press. The first hole I'm drilling is the 1 5/8 Forstner bit. And if you don't have that, you can use a smaller one and then take a square nose scraper or a parting tool and widen the hole on the end. I'm just getting it close but not touching the wood. Slow the speed down a little bit. Need to make sure the Jacob's chuck is in there securely. Go in slow to start. And we're only going to the bottom edge of the drill bit. Okay, we're done with that one. That way there's enough room for the pieces of the mechanism to stick up and they won't be hitting when you set your mill down. Okay, now I'm going with 1 1/16 inch drill bit. I have a shorter one which I will start with, and then I have one on an extension to get me up inside. So I need to decide where my top is going to separate from the base. So the top can be tall or it can be shorter, it's up to you. So if I make my top about there, this will be my base. I'm going to cut it off. I'll lose about that much wood in the cutting off process. We start with the short 1 1/16 drill bit. To back that off a little, push it in further. Now you should only crank it in about 5 or 6 turns and then get it out to clear the material out. If you keep going in, you'll get too much buildup inside, which will seize the drill bit. Push it in, lock it. When you're retracting the drill bit, I like to hold on to it to pull it out, whether I'm cranking it backwards or moving the whole tailstock. If you don't do that, this can come loose out of here and it'll be flopping around and it's dangerous. I have the quill out so far. I need to retract it to continue drilling. But I'm in far enough now to use the bit with the extension. you're doing a real tall peppermill, say a 14-inch one, you'll need a longer extension. Okay, so that's 6 cranks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the tailstock. Now I'm going to try and drill all the way up to somewhere in this area. That way when I drill from the other side, I won't have as much to do. Okay, I want to take out the Jacob's chuck just to measure. So if I run all the way up to the face of the Jacob's chuck, I'll be up to about right here on the inside. Is there a 5/16 drill bit right above the lathe on that magnet? That should be the one. Flat point. Perfect. Okay, we're almost there. Okay, the next step is we put our large cone center back on. This is going to go inside because this is running perfectly true. Usually it's not, it's wobbling a little. And with your cone center inside the holes we just drilled, that will chew up this into the hole. Now I'm going to cut a tenon over here to put it in the chuck when I drill this other side after I part the two pieces off. Remember that my blank is still big. It's much bigger than it's going to be at the finished product. Okay, the next step is take a thin parting tool and go ahead and part this off. Cut it free, the lid free from the base. And if we line it up right, we have the heartwood and the sapwood, so there's two different colors of wood here. This line should line up just perfect. I chose this end as the top because the division there is almost perfectly in line with the lathe. Down here it was curved a little bit, so this end, that grain is going to line up perfectly when we put the top on the mill, even though we're taking out about 1/4 inch. This tenon will be the actual base size of my Peppermil down here. So we have the tailstock support on. I need to make a tenon like this to go into the base. It does not have to be this tall as the one you see here. It can be shorter, and I need to part it off. when you're cutting in like this, you need to make sure you go left and right, and widen the hole slightly so it doesn't seize the tool. Okay, now take the thin tool and cut it most of the way off. And you never want to cut this off completely with the tailstock still in. You need to take that away, otherwise it will jam at an angle and grab your tool, and if you're not ready for it, it'll take the tool and right out of your hand. So I'm going to get it small, maybe the size of this pencil down inside, and then cut it off. Okay, we're there. Slow the lathe down a little. Loosen the tailstock. I can hold the blank lightly. Cut it all the way off. For now, we're just going to set that one down. Okay, so I need a 7/16 drill hole to go through the top for the rod for the mechanism. And I need a 7/8 hole in the end, just very slightly down. It only needs to be about a 1/16 inch deep for the nickel plate to fit in there. This little plate is what drives the grinder, and it fits right on here like this. And if you create a little depth that fits down into, it's perfectly centered. And if you just drill it on the flat, a lot of times you'll get it offside, and your mechanism will be loose on one turn and then it'll bind. So if it's perfectly centered, that's what you want. First, we want to drill the larger hole because it has a center pilot point on it. That way, when we go back to this one, it'll go right in that hole. If we drill the bigger hole first, that little point on the larger drill bit doesn't have anything to grab, and it will jump around and make the hole bigger than it needs to be. Get the Jacobs chuck back on. And after you do a few peppermills, you'll get the hang of it. So I want to take the corner of my parting tool and make a tiny divot in the center, because there was a little nub sticking out from parting it off. Get the tool rest out of the way. Bring it up close but not touching. Turn the lathe on, and remember, we only need to go in a 1/16 of an inch. 1/8 inch is okay. That's fine. We now have enough that fits in perfectly. Now, they tell you to drill a 7/8 hole, but every Peppermil maker I've seen, this thing is bigger than 7/8, and it never fits in that hole. So you can either take your parting tool and come in and widen it ever so slightly, but what I do is I put these on the lathe and I turn the outer diameter down just slightly to 7/8, and it fits in there perfectly snug like that. It's real easy to do. You just put it up against the headstock, the spindle quill with your live center right in there, and it'll spin, and you come with the parting tool lightly and just go back and forth, and it shaves it right down. These are made out of aluminum. Alright, now I need to drill my 5/16 hole. And always start your hole slowly. Cranking it in slow. Once you got it started, then you can go a little faster. And the same, I hold this and I pull out on it. You can also grab your drill bit with vice grips if you want for support. Now this is poplar wood I'm using. It's very soft, so I can literally take this and just push it in and pull it out. And it'll drill my hole really quick. See, and we're all the way through. Now if you're using rosewood, that doesn't work. It's too hard. This is very soft wood. Okay, so I have the underside done, the holes drilled. We're going to remove it from the chuck and put the other piece in and continue drilling from this side with our 1 1/16 hole. And again, hold it from the end when you're putting it in the chuck, not like the side, because if you hold it here, you're going to hold it a little sideways and your blank's going to wobble. If you hold it from the end, you turn it on, it's true. Here versus there. Okay, and on this end there's a little nub from parting it off, so we want to get rid of that. Very lightly with the parting tool. And again, do a little dimple in there for the point on the Forstner bit to grab. If you don't do that, it'll create a little problem. It doesn't need to be very big. Going back to our shorter 1 1/16 inch drill bit. Drive the spindle back a little bit first. Get it close, go in slowly to start. The lathe is on a table which is on foam pads, that's why it's wobbling a little bit. And you'll feel it just punched through. Now sometimes you're retracting the drill bit with the quill, going around and around, and it'll be screaming. You'll be just making the loudest noise, so that's why I released the tailstock and I pull the whole unit out in one shot. It gets it out fast and you're not hearing this screaming sound in your ears. Okay, we're done with the drill bits and the Jacobs chuck. Going back to my large cone center, and these are like $20 at Craft Supply. This is my favorite live center besides the one-way with the multi-heads. But we're done with the chuck for now, because if we have our piece in the chuck and the hole is not centered true to your tenon, when you make it, this side will be thicker than that side because it'll be off center, and it may affect the mechanism how it works. So we can either make a jam chuck which goes in there with the two different size holes. That way you could center it on the hole with your live center, or we made one up on a faceplate. This is the 1 5/8, the 1 1/16, and the 5/16 drill bit sizes. That way we can take our piece and just stick it on like that, put the center in the other end, and it running perfectly true to the holes we drilled. So I need to remove the chuck. Screw on the faceplate. This bottom, it's cut pretty clean. If it's not level, we need to cut it again and undercut it. It looks pretty good. So I could go on my jam chuck and then the live center. Now the outside may wobble, and it is just slightly, but it's true to the center holes. Now I could go ahead and cut my shape. So if I do something like this, this side will be the top, that side's the bottom. I could go ahead and do my piece. I can cut 2 beads, 3 beads, whatever I want. Make it as thin as I want. But if you're going thin like this one, you have to remember you have a 1 1/16 hole you drilled in there. Some of the mills I do, if they're a smaller mill, I will make the inner hole a lot bigger. This end has to be 1 1/16 for the mechanism, but when you drill down in here, you can go with the bigger one so it holds more material. So for this demonstration, we're just going to leave it the way it is. And remember, the bottom here was my tenon. Now there are some chuck marks on here from the jaws on the chuck, so I need to cut that very slightly smaller. Anytime you put something in the chuck, it's going to leave marks. I want to look at my mill. So I have a bead at the top, a bead somewhere down here. I'll just take my parting tool, define my beads. One there, and one there. Now I like to use the spindle gouge to make beads with. You can use the skew, you can use a beading tool where it has the bead shape on the inside, but those are scrapers, and on a wood as soft as poplar it would tear the grain up a lot. If you have a very dense wood like cocobolo or rosewood, those beaters work quite well. So a spindle gouge to do a bead. I have it with the flute up, the groove, and we're going to start in the center of the bead, roll it to the right or left, whichever side you're doing, and lift my handle while I'm rolling it, keeping contact for the bevel, the grind mark that you use to sharpen. So I start in the center, left, I go the opposite direction. Same up here. And you need to keep that bevel contact completely through your motion. When the tool gets down in the corner, I need the flute, the groove, on its side, and I need the handle raised so the point of the tool is pointing at dead center on there. If you're up a little, the edge curves down, and if you touch the wood, it's going to grab and run you over on the side. Okay. I think this looks a little big right here, so I'll take that down just a little. Okay, the top looks a little bit too large, so I want to reduce that real quick. Just take it down, back to the spindle gouge. Now the first few times you try and roll beads, you're not going to do well. No one does. After you do several hundred or 1,000, then you start getting the hang of it. So while you're learning, just know you have to learn to do it. The tool all the way on the left. Could you get that one for me, please? Thank you. This is a vortex tool. Cindy draws them, makes them, and sells them. It's just a high-speed steel rod. There's a bevel on the underside and a flat on the top. You're able to get down in very tight spaces. I want to cut down in here and just get rid of the crumb that's up next to the live center. I made this tool and it cost me about $3, so I don't mind hitting the metal and dulling it, because it was very efficient to make. Okay, now at this point I would go ahead and sand this whole thing. There's a little bump right here first I want to smooth out. Now, I also cut this top surface very smooth when I cut here, because that is where your piece fits on and they rub together. So this needs to be smooth. You don't want torn grain and to have rough bumps and things. It's got to be smooth for when you make your lid to rub on. First, I want to turn it around so I can clean up this bottom a little. And my jam chuck is made for that hole. All I have to do is stick it in like that. Come by with my spindle gouge. Get real close to that center. I don't want my spindle gouge to touch that, but this one I don't mind. I'm going to just take a piece of sandpaper and clean up that edge. Give the whole thing a light sand real quick. And that's a good thing about jam chucks. You can mount and remount it in different ways and do what you want to your piece. I can add decorations or embellishment to this. Now there's a hump right here I didn't notice before, but I could feel it. So I want to smooth that out. And this is the point where I would go ahead and sand my hole outside. Now if you're concerned with the roughness inside, sometimes you'll have a lot of torn grain in there. And there's always the piece that pops through that you have to get out of there. You can take a stick, cut a groove down here, and split it open, and you could put a piece of sandpaper in here and wrap it around, and while the lathe's running you could go in and sand the inside, or you could just do it by hand because this needs to be smooth. You won't see the inside hole, but if there's loose fibers they could get into the Peppermil, and then you're getting more fiber in your diet. So this part is done. We're going to do the lid now. The underside of the lid, we'll just put the top on first, bring this down. So if I do this kind of shape up here, maybe a little taller, or I could even do this kind of shape. It's up to me, whatever I want to do. And if you're new, it's whatever you're capable of or what you end up with. But we'll go back to the spindle roughing gouge. And that one's a little dull, so I'm going to pick up my big one. The diameter is still quite big. I want to check my diameter here. So if we look at this one, the diameter, you kind of almost have a flow where it comes up to match the side. So I want this a little bigger than that. And if I measure that diameter, we're just slightly bigger than that right now. Alright, so I also need to measure the hole inside, the tenon on here. I need to cut that to fit in here, not snug, but just slightly loose. So I can either use the points on the caliper to go inside, or if you don't have this style of caliper, you can measure your drill bit with another one. I like these because if I hold it on here and use the porting tool, when I get to the side it drops over, but these are loose and they open up a little bit. That way it makes it slightly bigger than I intended, and I can cut it down and custom fit it. So when I go with the drill bit again, real quick, that's my size. Take my 1/4 inch parting tool, get started. Now that should not fit into that hole. It should be a little bit large. The little ridge I want to get rid of first. Do a test fit. See, it fits in there, but it's very snug. Just toss it. It's quite firm, that's way too tight, so I need to loosen it up a little bit. Before I do that, I did not sand inside the edge, so I want to give this a quick little sand. There's some loose fibers, just to smooth that off. Test that again. It's almost perfect the way it is. Put the center back in. Now this undersurface here, I cut that with the spindle gouge so it'll be nice and smooth. I want to sand that surface and that surface. Since the fit is so good, if I lightly sand it, it'll probably be perfect. I'll put it in reverse. Sanding my tenon, the bottom of the tenon. Now, if the lathe is running in reverse, you could sand up here on top because this part of the wood is going up. If it's in forward, the wood's going down. You should sand up underneath. Otherwise, it will grab you and force you down like that. So, forward, speed underneath, reverse speed on top. I want to check my fit again. Okay, that's just perfect. Both surfaces are nice and smooth. The fit on that is perfect. So at this point, I'm going to turn it around. The underside is done up to my curve. Plus being able to turn it around, now I'm working on this edge, which the lathe is set up for a right-handed world, like most things are. So I can work better on this side than I can trying to come down in here. I'm going to switch over to the bowl gouge, just because I can come down in a little easier. Now I'm remembering the length where my rod's going to go fit almost right here. So I don't want to take the top off. That's where the knurl nut is going to screw onto my rod. So I need to figure, I'm leaving a space here about a ½ inch for that nut to go down to. So whatever shape I decide to make here, I just need to keep that in mind. And when you're cutting with the lathe, your tool is cutting right here, but your eye should be looking over here where you can see the profile taking shape. Alright, let's just see how this looks together. I'll put the top on. So, see, I can even turn it on and do things to it this way. That's running almost perfectly true since we trued everything up on the center hole. Now, that doesn't look too bad. I think I need to take off a little bit more in this area. I could undercut this a little more, give it a little more roundness to it, but I'm going to do right here first. Maybe come in here a little more of this shape. Maybe not as severe in as that one. In fact, I could do that right here. We'll just put this on here. Okay. I think we'll go with that right there. Now I could put this piece back on without the base on and sand that up and do things to it. I could take a texturing tool, I could take a wire and burn black grooves in here. There's a lot of different things we can do to embellish this. There's a couple tool marks right here, which newer people, you're just going to take heavier grit sandpaper and sand out. And if you have a choice, spend the extra $100 or $150 and get a lathe with reverse on it. It makes a good difference. You can do some cuts with it, but sanding, it really speeds up the process. Did you get that mill off the desk, that palm one, right there? This one? Yeah. Thank you. And the shape you make is just up to you. So, I recently took down a few palm trees, and they have these black fibers in them. Zero it in closer. It's really exciting looking stuff. But this is the normal size of them. But I recently got one that was quite a bit smaller. So I decided I'm going to do a Peppermil. And with it cut straight, let's go back overhead. That's a little close. With it cut absolutely straight, all you saw was straight black lines, so I rolled beads all the way up and down it. And this is going to be the top. I still have to cut off this little top bit. There's my holes for the mechanism. But this came out quite interesting. I really like this. And I got enough to make 6 more of these. So that's going to be cool. Now this, you should go ahead and sand it all the way done. If you like to apply finish on the lathe, you can go ahead and do that. I don't normally apply finish on the lathe. I do it off the lathe. So we need to drill holes for our parts. So in our top, yeah, we need it in close here. We're going to take our nickel plate, insert it in the base. This one I already trimmed down. I have a small drill bit, which is about the size of the shank of the drill, or the screw. So I'll go ahead and drill these holes. Over on the wall, could you bring me that smallest screwdriver?
Number 1, number 2?
The small one. That one. So, the mechanisms usually come with 2 short screws and 2 long screws. The short screws go in this plate. So we would screw those into place. And you must drill a hole to get the screws in. I'm only going to put one in right now. So. Now the top piece, we're doing the pepper mechanism. So I want to take all this apart. And use a tray to hold your parts. So if you're just doing them on a table where there's chips all around and they fall off, you got to look for them. So I want to get all the parts out. This big U-shaped part goes in first. The outer parts of it fit inside the 1 5/8, and you just pick it. I like to either do it where the grain goes across or this way. This way I'm going to do that way. If you have something like rosewood and you leave some of the sapwood on, the yellow, I try and put a screw or both screws where the yellow is. It's so much softer and easier to drill. I need to drill 2 holes right there. Okay, so we take our rod. First we put on the grinder, and then we put on the other part to the grinder, and down in the hole there, the spring has a fatter end and a narrow end. The fatter end goes against the mechanism. No, it's the opposite. The smaller end goes against the mechanism, and the fatter end goes in here. Now there's a little notch on both sides of here, and they have to fit over the first piece we put in. And then we put the lid on, the top. Where'd the top go?
Is that it? Down there?
On the floor?
Yeah,
Behind you.
down.
Top. We lost the top. So we're going to put the top on. Okay, now we have, with the you need to hold your finger on here. With the mechanism on, that's sticking up. And it might work. We may have to trim a little off the shaft. No, that works fine. Since I measured it, that goes all the way snug. Okay, now we need to take this little crossbar, and that goes across the top of that. And if you put the lid on with the knob, this is much easier to put this piece on. And you take the 2 longer screws. I'm just going to stick a short screw in there for now. Now remember, this is soft poplar, so this is going in quite easy. If you get a real nice piece of hard cocobolo or some exotic burl and the wood's really hard, you want the biggest drill bit to drill those pilot holes as you can without doing that. Okay, now we have a working mill. So finish. Sometimes I'll coat the whole outside lightly with CA glue and then just buff it. Sometimes I'll put lacquer on it. Sometimes I'll do polyurethane. You do your favorite finish. Just remember what this is used for. People are going to be picking it up a lot and touching it. And they're going to have wet hands from touching a salad and things. So you want a durable finish on it. Okay, now the top of this curve, there's a little space which I kind of don't like, and I see some marks on the top. So I would remount this lid and just cut that off just a tiny bit so it transitions up into the nut a little bit more. Just to refine the shape. And I may also, you know, if I wanted to curve in here a little more, I could easily remount this right back on the lathe. I just have to take all the parts out and do that. I usually seal the inside with shellac, but it's not necessary. It's just bare wood, and your salt or peppercorns in there or whatever you want to put in to grind will work out. And see, this one needs more sanding. There's kind of a little bump here, and I would go ahead and sand this up perfect and put some finish on it. So that's it.